He had a medical degree, read political philosophy in the dressing room, and smoked a pack of cigarettes a day. And most people still believe he was simply a footballer. What they do not know is that he was something far more dangerous than that. There is a version of this story where he wins the World Cup, moves to a great European club, and retires as a universally celebrated legend. He chose a different story, and that choice changed everything. He was born in the port city of Belém in the northern heart of Brazil, where the Amazon River breathes into the Atlantic and the heat never truly leaves. His father was a bank clerk who read voraciously, and from the very beginning, the boy understood that words and ideas were a form of power. On streets made of red dust and ambition, a skinny curly-haired boy taught himself to play football with a skill that frightened older boys twice his size. But even then, between matches, he was reading, always reading. His family moved to Santos and then to São Paulo, and by the time he was a teenager, it was already impossible to separate him from two things: a football and a book. His intelligence was not a hobby alongside football. It was the same thing. He enrolled in medical school while already playing semi-professional football, a decision that most people in Brazilian football culture at the time considered either remarkable or completely insane. He did not care what they thought. Brazil in the early 1970s was not a free country. A military dictatorship had seized power in 1964 and had spent a decade tightening its grip on every corner of Brazilian life, including its football clubs. Football clubs in Brazil were run like private fiefdoms. Directors held absolute power over players, controlling their contracts, their wages, and even their daily lives. Players were assets, not people, and dissent was met with silence or exile. When he arrived at Corinthians in the late 1970s, he was already a qualified doctor, a Marxist intellectual, and a man who had never once accepted being told what to think. The collision between who he was and how football was run was inevitable. Stories like this one almost never get told in full, the ones where athletes become something greater than the sport itself. If these are the kind of stories that move you, follow this channel, because there are many more voices waiting to be heard. He was drinking heavily, smoking constantly, staying out through the night. Behavior that would have ended lesser careers before they began. But every time he stepped onto the pitch, the genius was undeniable, and his coaches found themselves powerless to look away. His body was a contradiction, abused off the pitch and electrifying on it. He could stop a match with a single touch, releasing a pass before any defender had understood what he was doing, his mind always 3 seconds ahead of everyone else on the field. In 1982, something extraordinary was assembled inside the Brazilian national team, a group of players so technically brilliant, so expressive, and so philosophically free that football commentators struggled to find the right language to describe them. He stood at the heart of that team, tall, bearded, unhurried, conducting the midfield like a doctor diagnosing a problem before anyone else had even noticed a symptom. The world had not seen a footballer quite like this before. The 1982 World Cup in Spain became something the football world still mourns. That Brazilian side, playing some of the most beautiful football ever witnessed, was eliminated in the second round in a match that left an entire generation speechless. Back in São Paulo, something was already growing that would outlast any World Cup. At Corinthians, he and a small group of players and club employees had begun building something almost no one believed was possible inside professional football: a democracy. The Corinthians democracy, as it became known, gave every person inside the club an equal vote on every decision, from transfers to training schedules to how the budget was spent. The players voted alongside the cooks and the kit men. He was its intellectual engine, its most famous face, and its most committed believer. He wrote about it, spoke about it publicly, and used his fame to protect it when the club directors tried to dismantle it. This was not a project, it was a conviction. On the pitch, the results were just as extraordinary. Corinthians won the São Paulo State Championship in 1982 and again in 1983. The experiment was not just philosophically beautiful, it was winning. By 1984, European clubs were circling. Fiorentina in Italy eventually secured his signature, and he arrived in Florence as one of the most talked about players in the world. Italy would prove to be a complicated chapter. Serie A was the most demanding tactical league in the world, and the Italian system demanded discipline, rigidity, and obedience, everything he had spent his career resisting. He played beautifully, but he never truly settled. and the old habits of late nights and cigarettes returned with force. He returned to Brazil, played for several more clubs, and continued drinking, continued reading, continued speaking. Those who played with him in his final years said even at half pace he made the game look like philosophy made physical. He retired from professional football in 1984 at club level, but never fully left the game. He coached, he wrote columns, he appeared on television, he argued about politics and football as though they were the same conversation, because for him, they always had been. The tragedy was never far away. He had spent decades telling his body things it could not sustain, and by the time the world began to properly understand what he had meant to football, his health was already in serious decline. On the 4th of December 2011, he died of septic shock caused by an intestinal infection. He was 57 years old. The football world stopped, and then immediately began arguing, because that is what he would have wanted. Tributes came from every corner of the world, not only from football, but from political movements, universities, and artists who had never kicked a ball in their lives. That breadth of grief said everything about who he had actually been. The Corinthians' democracy remains one of the most radical experiments in the history of professional sport. Academics study it, labor movements cite it, football philosophers return to it again and again as proof that the game can be something more than commerce. Every Brazilian player who carries a book into a dressing room, every footballer who refuses to treat silence as safety, every athlete who insists that their sport must answer to the world, all of them walk in a shadow he cast with his intellect, his courage, and his left foot. He never won the World Cup. He never collected the European honors that his talent deserved. And in the end, none of that is the point. The point is that he used football as a language to say something true about power, freedom, and the dignity of ordinary people. Some players leave behind goals and trophies. He left behind questions, and the questions he left behind are still the most important ones that football has not yet learned to answer. If this story moved you, if you believe football carries more history than the scorelines ever show, then follow Football Untold, because every week we return to the matches, the men, and the moments that the game almost let the world forget.